On Memorial Day, in front of 30 people, my son handed his father-in-law the keys to a $20,000 bass fishing boat and handed me a scratch-off lottery ticket worth $2. I smiled. I said thank you. I folded the ticket into my shirt pocket and drove home alone through the early summer evening, windows down, trying to remember the last time my son had looked at me like I mattered. 3 weeks later, I found out the answer to that question. And when I did, I made sure he found out something too. My name is Walter Briggs. I'm 63 years old. For 35 years, I taught American history at Lincoln High School in Clarksville, Tennessee. I retired 4 years ago with a pension that pays me $54,000 a year, which in Clarksville means you're comfortable but not impressive. I live in a 3-bedroom house on Maple Ridge Drive that my late wife Helen and I bought when interest rates were high and our ambitions were higher. Helen died 4 years ago. Ovarian cancer. 7 months from diagnosis to the end. I held her hand through all of it. After she passed, I learned what silence sounds like when the person who filled every room is gone. My daughter Sophie is 32. She's a registered nurse at Vanderbilt University Medical Center in Nashville. She drives 40 minutes each way without complaining, works 12-hour shifts, and still calls me every Sunday morning. She laughs like her mother. She has Helen's stubbornness and Helen's grace. And when I look at her, I sometimes have to remind myself to breathe. My son Marcus is 35. He built a real estate development company in Nashville 8 years ago, starting with a $50,000 loan from me and Helen that he swore he'd pay back once he got established. He drives a black Mercedes. He wears a watch that costs more than my first car. He married Stephanie Whitmore 3 years ago. Stephanie's father, Gerald, made his money in commercial construction, the kind of money that builds wings on hospitals and puts names on buildings. Gerald is 65 years old, silver-haired, and carries himself like a man who has never once doubted whether he belonged somewhere. The cookout was at Marcus and Stephanie's house, a 4,000-square-foot colonial in a neighborhood where every lawn looks like a magazine cover. It was Memorial Day, Sunday afternoon. 30 people, maybe more. Stephanie had hired a caterer. There were centerpieces on the outdoor tables and a bartender mixing cocktails by the pool. Sophie had offered to come with me. I told her to enjoy her weekend. That was a mistake. I sat near the middle of a long table between one of Stephanie's cousins and a man whose name I'd already forgotten twice. Gerald held court at the head of the table, the way men like Gerald always do, easy, loud, taking up exactly as much space as he wanted. Marcus sat to his right, leaning in when Gerald spoke, nodding at the right moments. Halfway through the meal, Gerald raised his glass. "I want to say something," he announced, and the table quieted. "I am proud of this family. Proud of my daughter. Proud of the man she chose." He smiled at Marcus. Marcus grinned back. "And Marcus, you've been talking about that property on Riverside Drive for 2 years now. I think it's time you stop talking and start building." He set down his glass and pulled a set of keys from his jacket pocket. "The boat you've had your eye on at White's Marina. She's yours. Early birthday present." Marcus stood up. He actually stood up and hugged Gerald in front of everyone. The table erupted. People clapped. Someone whistled. Stephanie covered her mouth with both hands. "Dad," Marcus said, his voice thick, "I don't even know what to say. $20,000. I knew because Marcus had mentioned that boat to me twice. Said he'd been saving up for it. Maybe next summer. Maybe the one after. He'd been saving up while collecting rent from my property and not telling me. But I didn't know that yet. And Dad," Marcus said, turning to me. He was still smiling. He reached into his other pocket and set something on the table in front of me. A scratch-off lottery ticket. The $2 kind you buy at gas stations. "Figured maybe your luck's about to change," he said. The table laughed. Not mean laughter, just the automatic kind people produce when someone with a $20,000 boat makes a joke at the expense of someone with a teacher's pension. Gerald chuckled. Stephanie's cousin leaned away from me slightly, as if poverty were contagious. I picked up the ticket. The edges were soft from sitting in Marcus's pocket. The printing was slightly smudged. He'd bought it as an afterthought, possibly on the drive over. $2 against $20,000 in front of 30 witnesses. I put the ticket in my shirt pocket and said, "Thanks, son." The conversation moved on. Gerald started talking about the boat's engine specs. I sat there with my potato salad and a glass of sweet tea and thought about the drive home. I left before dessert, said I was tired. Sophie would have known that wasn't true. I never leave before dessert, but Sophie wasn't there. I drove home through the long summer evening and stood on my back porch watching the fireflies come up in the yard. The same yard where Marcus used to catch lightning bugs in a mason jar when he was 7 years old. The same yard where Helen used to grow tomatoes in raised beds along the fence line. I went inside. I sat in the armchair by the window, the one I never replaced after Helen died because it still smelled faintly like her perfume. And I stayed there until dark. That Sunday, Sophie called. She always called Sunday mornings. I told her about the cookout, about the boat, about the ticket. I kept my voice level because I'd had a week to process it and I didn't want to upset her. There was a long pause. Then she said, "Dad, did you scratch it?" I laughed, short and dry. "Sophie, it's a $2 ticket. Check it," she said. "I'm serious. Check it right now." I walked to the entryway, where my jacket hung on a hook by the door. The ticket was in the inside pocket. I carried it to the kitchen table and looked at it in the morning light. It was a Tennessee Lottery scratch-off, Gold Cash Club. I found a quarter in the junk drawer. "Okay," I told her. "I'm scratching. Tell me what you see." I scratched the first panel, then the second, then the third. I set the quarter down and looked at the ticket for a long moment without speaking. "Dad, what happened?" $85,000, I said. The silence on her end lasted 3 full seconds. "What?" I read the panel to her twice. Then I went to the Tennessee Lottery website on my laptop while she stayed on the phone. I entered the ticket number. The screen loaded. $85,000. Verified winner. Sophie made a sound. I hadn't heard from her since she was a little girl, something between a scream and a laugh, and said, "Don't tell Marcus." I hadn't even thought of telling Marcus. "Not yet. I won't," I said. "Don't tell anyone. Just sit on it. And Dad, you need to call Frank Patterson." Frank Patterson was my lawyer. He'd handled Helen's estate, had gone to college with me, fished with me twice a year on Dale Hollow Lake. I trusted him the way you trust someone who's seen you at your worst and stayed anyway. I called Frank Monday morning. He answered on the second ring, and I told him about the ticket. He congratulated me, then asked why I sounded like I wasn't sure whether to be glad. "I need you to look at something else," I said. "A document I signed a couple of years ago." I drove to his office Tuesday afternoon with the ticket in my breast pocket and a manila folder under my arm. 3 years earlier, Marcus had asked me to sign some paperwork related to the duplex, a rental property Helen had bought in 2009, 2 units on Garrison Street, each renting for $1,400 a month. Marcus had offered to manage it after Helen died, said it would take the burden off me. I was grieving and exhausted, and I signed what he put in front of me. Frank put on his reading glasses and looked at the document for a long time. "Walter," he said finally, "this is a property management agreement, but it also contains a limited power of attorney clause." He turned the page and pointed. "It authorizes Marcus to collect rents, negotiate leases, and sign documents on your behalf related to the Garrison Street property." I looked at the clause. It was buried on page 3 in the kind of language that looks routine until someone with a law degree reads it slowly. "How much were you told the units were renting for?" Frank asked. $1,400 each, $2,800 a month. Marcus had been sending me $1,200. Frank was quiet for a moment. "And you never saw the actual lease agreements?" "No." I trusted him. Frank took off his glasses and set them on the desk. "Walter, I'm going to need to do some digging. Can you give me a week?" He called me the following Thursday. His voice was careful the way voices get when someone is about to tell you something they wish they didn't have to say. "The units have been renting for $2,200 each since January of 2 years ago, $4,400 a month. Marcus has been remitting you $1,200. I did the math sitting at my kitchen table. 4,400 minus 1,200 equals $3,200 a month that my son had been pocketing from my property for at least 2 years. More than $75,000. "There's something else," Frank said. "Helen had a life insurance policy through her employer, $180,000, payable to me as sole beneficiary. I remembered signing the beneficiary form at the hospital HR office when she started teaching elementary school in 1991. After she died, I expected a check. I called the insurance company twice and was told the claim had already been processed. I assumed it had gone to the estate and I'd missed the paperwork in my grief. I let it go. I had let it go because I was 60 years old and my wife had just died, and some things were too heavy to carry all at once. Frank had requested records through a formal discovery inquiry. The check had been issued. The claim had been filed with a power of attorney document, not the property management one. A separate document Marcus had apparently filed. The check had been deposited into an account that was not mine. I sat in my kitchen for a long time after Frank hung up. $180,000. Helen had bought that policy for me, had kept paying the premiums for 30 years, so that if something happened to her, I would be all right. And my son had taken it. Sophie came over that Friday evening. I sat her down at the kitchen table and told her everything in the order I'd learned it. She didn't cry. She went very still, the way she does when she's at work and someone is telling her something that requires her full attention. When I finished, she folded her hands in front of her and said, "What do you want to do?" "I want to do it right," I said. "The right way. I don't want to make this about hurting him. I want the truth on the table where everyone can see it." She nodded slowly. "You said Marcus has been talking about buying the Garrison Street property himself. Frank mentioned something about a developer offer?" Frank had found that too. The neighborhood around Garrison Street had been rezoned for mixed-use commercial development 18 months ago. The duplex Helen bought for $180,000 was now worth conservatively $980,000. A developer had made a formal offer of $1.1 million. Marcus had not told me about the offer. Using the power of attorney clause, he had the authority to negotiate the sale. He'd been stalling, Frank suspected, while arranging private financing to purchase the property from me at below market value before I found out what it was worth. My son had been planning to buy my $1 million property for whatever number he could convince me to accept, using money he'd stolen from my wife's life insurance policy to fund the purchase. "He thinks I don't check my mail," I said quietly. "He thinks I don't pay attention." Sophie reached across the table and took my hand. "What do we do first?" We did it methodically. Frank filed a complaint with the Tennessee Department of Commerce and Insurance regarding the fraudulent insurance claim. He contacted the district attorney's office with documentation of the rental fraud receipts, lease agreements Marcus had signed, using the power of attorney, bank records showing the deposits into the account that was not mine. The life insurance fraud was a federal matter. Frank had a colleague in federal practice who handled that piece. I did not call Marcus. I did not change my behavior. I still answered when he texted. I still responded to the family group chat. Marcus, Stephanie, Sophie, me, and Stephanie's parents. A thread Gerald had created when the wedding happened. When Marcus texted to ask if I wanted to come see the new boat, I said it sounded great. Maybe next weekend. When he asked about the Garrison Street property in the same message, just checking in, "It might have a buyer. We should talk." I said, "Sure. Let me know." He didn't know I knew. I want to be honest about what those 3 weeks felt like. There were mornings I sat with my coffee and thought about Marcus at 7 years old, the way he used to climb into my lap on Sunday mornings before church and ask me to read him the sports page. The way he cried when the Titans lost the Super Bowl, and I held him on the couch and told him there would be other seasons. I thought about driving him to his first job interview when he was 17, coaching him on handshakes and eye contact. About the $50,000 Helen and I lent him when he was 27 and terrified and full of ideas. We never asked for it back. We were his parents. That's what parents do. I thought about Helen buying that insurance policy. Working 30 years as an elementary school librarian so that if she was gone before me, I would be okay. And I thought about my son taking that money while I sat in her armchair in the evenings and couldn't hear her voice anywhere in the house. I did not feel righteous. I felt sad. But sad and silent were not the same thing, and I had been silent long enough. Gerald Whitmore called me on a Thursday evening, 2 weeks after the cookout. I almost didn't answer. Then I thought about it and picked up. "Walter," he said. His voice was different from the one he used at dinner parties, less performed. I wanted to apologize for the cookout. What Marcus did the way he did it, I didn't think it was appropriate. I was quiet for a moment. I appreciate that, Gerald. I've got a son-in-law. I also have a father, and I know how that kind of thing lands. He paused. He's a bright young man, but sometimes bright and decent aren't the same thing. I didn't tell him what I knew. Not yet. They're not, I agreed. Gerald cleared his throat. For what it's worth, you're always welcome at our table. You don't need an invitation from Marcus to be part of this family. I thanked him, and we said goodbye. I sat for a long time after that call. Gerald was not the villain in this story. He was a man whose daughter had married someone who turned out to be one thing while pretending to be another. He would have his own reckoning. I didn't need to be the one to deliver it, but he would get there. Frank called 2 days later. The district attorney's office had reviewed the documentation and agreed to open a formal investigation. The federal side was moving separately but in parallel. We were not yet at the arrest stage, but we were close. Before this goes public, Frank said, do you want to confront him yourself first? I'd thought about that. In my head, I had imagined confronting Marcus in a restaurant, or calling him while he was with Gerald, or waiting until he came to the house. None of those felt right. I wanted Sophie there. I wanted everything documented. I wanted no room for him to reframe it afterward, to tell Stephanie some other version, to tell Gerald some other version. Family dinner, I said. My house. Sunday. Frank was quiet. You sure? He won't be expecting it. And I want everyone at the same table when the truth comes out. I sent a text to the group thread that evening. Simple. Sunday dinner at my place. 5 o'clock. Come hungry. Marcus responded with a thumbs-up emoji. Stephanie said they'd bring a salad. Sophie sent me a private message that said, I'll be there. I love you, Dad. I spent Saturday cooking. Helen's pot roast, the recipe she'd clipped from a magazine in 1998, and made every Sunday for 20 years. I set the table with the good plates we only used for company. I watered her tomato plants in the raised beds by the fence. I sat on the back porch in the afternoon light and watched the yard and felt, for the first time in weeks, completely calm. Sunday evening, Sophie arrived first. She helped me carry things from the kitchen, and we moved around each other in the easy way you learn after 30 years of dinners together. She squeezed my arm once, and that was enough. Marcus and Stephanie arrived at 5:15. Gerald and Patricia, Stephanie's mother, came a few minutes behind them. I hadn't told Marcus his in-laws were coming. He glanced at Gerald when he walked in, and something moved across his face, brief and unreadable. Then he smiled and shook Gerald's hand and hugged his mother-in-law and said, "What a great idea. The more the merrier." We ate. I kept the conversation easy. Gerald's new construction project, Stephanie's yoga studio plans, Sophie's unit at Vanderbilt. Marcus was relaxed, talking, gesturing with his fork the way he did when he felt comfortable. Stephanie refilled wine glasses and laughed at the right moments. Patricia asked about Helen's pot roast recipe, and I walked her through it from memory. After the plates were cleared and the coffee was poured, I set a folder on the table in front of me. Marcus looked at it. His expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes. "There's something I need to share with everyone," I said. My voice was level. I'd practiced this. Not the words exactly, but the tone, calm, factual. The same voice I'd used in 35 years of classrooms, when I needed 30 teenagers to listen to something that mattered. I opened the folder. 2 years ago, I signed a property management agreement for the Garrison Street duplex. I slid a copy across to Marcus. The document included a limited power of attorney clause, which I did not fully understand when I signed it. I turned to Gerald. The duplex was a rental property Helen bought in 2009. When she passed, Marcus offered to manage it. I was grateful. "Dad," Marcus said quietly, "what is this?" "I'm getting there." I pulled out the next document. For the past 2 years, the units on Garrison Street have been renting at $2,200 each per month. That's $4,400 per month. Marcus has been remitting me $1,200. Patricia set down her coffee cup. The difference, $3,200 a month for 26 months, was deposited into an account in Marcus's name. I slid that document across too. The bank records. Neat rows of numbers that told a very clear story. Gerald leaned forward and picked up the page. "There's more," I said. I told them about the life insurance policy, about Helen buying it in 1991, paying premiums for 27 years, naming me as the sole beneficiary, about the claim that had been filed after her death using a power of attorney document I had no memory of signing, using my name, about the $180,000 check that had been deposited into an account I did not control. Stephanie's hand went to her mouth. "I'd like to show you one more thing." I pulled out the developer's offer, the $1.1 million bid on the Garrison Street property, the rezoning documents, the timeline showing that Marcus had been informed of the offer 14 months ago and had not mentioned it to me. Based on the power of attorney clause, Marcus had the legal authority to negotiate this sale on my behalf. He did not tell me the property existed as a commercial development opportunity. He has been, according to my attorney, arranging private financing to purchase the property from me at a price well below market value. The silence at the table was absolute. Gerald set down the bank records. He looked at Marcus with an expression. I recognized the face of a man who has just understood something that will take a long time to fully absorb. "Marcus," Gerald said. "Just the name, nothing else. This isn't there's context here." Marcus's voice had changed. Something had gone out of it. The ease that had been there all through dinner, it was gone. "Dad, the power of attorney was for administrative purposes. I was protecting the asset." "Whose asset?" I asked. "Yours. I was managing it for you. You were collecting rent from my property, depositing $3,200 a month into your account, and not telling me. That's not management, Marcus. That's theft." He pushed back from the table slightly. "I was going to pay it back. I was planning. Your mother's life insurance." I said it quietly. "She paid premiums for 27 years. She did that for me. She sat in that hospital in September, and she told me she wasn't afraid for herself. She was afraid for me, that I'd be okay. That was why she kept that policy. And you took it." Marcus opened his mouth, closed it. Patricia reached across the table and took Stephanie's hand. Stephanie had not moved. She was looking at her husband with something I could not fully read, not surprise exactly, but the particular expression of someone who has been not quite knowing something for a very long time and has just been handed the confirmation. Gerald stood up. He was a big man, and he stood up slowly, the way men do when they're trying to stay controlled. "I need a moment." He walked to the back door and stepped outside onto the porch. Sophie had not spoken since the meal ended. She sat to my right with her hands folded on the table, watching Marcus the way nurses watch patients who are about to make a decision that isn't in their best interest. "I want you to know," I said, "that I am not telling you this to hurt you. I am telling you because my attorney has already filed the documentation with the district attorney's office, and the federal insurance fraud complaint is with the appropriate agency, and I thought you deserved to hear it from me before you hear it from them." I paused. "You should call a lawyer tonight. A real one." Marcus sat very still. The expensive watch on his wrist caught the light from the overhead fixture. "I also want you to know," I said, "that I have accepted the developer's offer on Garrison Street. Frank Patterson countersigned on my behalf this week. The sale closes in 60 days. Stephanie stood up abruptly, chair scraping, and walked to the back door. I watched her go. A few seconds later, through the window, I could see her and Gerald standing on the porch. She was talking. He had his back to the house. Marcus and I sat across the table from each other, Sophie between us, saying nothing. $50,000, Marcus said finally. His voice was low. "That's what you and Mom gave me to start the company. Do you know what I built with that? Do you know what it's worth now?" "I know," I said, "and I'm proud of what you built. That was never the question." "So what was the question?" "The question was whether you thought I'd notice." I folded my hands on the table. "Whether you thought I was too old or too tired or too trusting to pay attention. Whether you thought my grief made me easy." He looked away. "You gave your father-in-law a $20,000 fishing boat," I said. "You gave me a $2 scratch-off in front of 30 people. And I smiled and said thank you, and you thought that meant I wasn't paying attention. I looked at my son across the table. I've been paying attention, Marcus. I've been paying attention my whole life. I just kept hoping you'd become the person I believed you could be. He didn't answer. You should go, Sophie said, the first words she'd spoken in over an hour. Calm, precise, irreversible. Marcus stood. He picked up his keys from the counter without looking at either of us. He paused at the back door, hand on the frame. I didn't think of it as taking, he said. I thought of it as I thought I'd pay it back. I thought I had more time. You always thought you had more time, I said. He walked outside. A few minutes later, I heard the black Mercedes back out of the driveway. Gerald came back inside while Sophie was washing dishes. He stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at me for a long moment. Gerald Whitmore, the man who'd clapped Marcus on the shoulder and called him thoughtful and given him a boat. He looked older than he had an hour ago. I didn't know any of this, he said. I didn't think you did. He sat down at the kitchen table. Patricia sat across from him. Stephanie was still outside, on the phone with someone. I heard her voice through the screen door, low and steady, the way people talk when they're trying not to fall apart in front of a house full of relatives. Walter, Gerald said, I owe you an apology that goes back further than tonight. The way I've spoken to you at dinners, the way I've let my son-in-law treat you in my presence. He shook his head. I thought you were. I made assumptions about what you were worth, because of what you earned, because you were a teacher. He looked at the folder, still sitting on the table. I was wrong. You were, I said. But you're here now, and that matters. We sat together for another hour. Patricia made a second pot of coffee. Gerald asked about Helen, what she was like, how we'd met. I told him about the summer of 1983, the community pool in Clarksville. Helen in a yellow swimsuit reading a John Irving novel on a lounge chair. How I'd walked over and asked her what she was reading, and she'd said, The World, according to Garp, without looking up. And I'd said I'd read it, and she'd said, What did you think? And I'd said it was the best book I'd ever read, which was a lie because I'd never read it. And 2 weeks later I'd read the whole thing, so I'd be ready in case she asked again. Gerald laughed at that. Patricia put her hand over her mouth. Sophie drove them home at 9 o'clock. I stood on the front porch and watched the taillights disappear down Maple Ridge Drive. I went inside and sat in Helen's armchair. The house was quiet. Not the same quiet as the first year after she was gone. The kind of quiet that felt like a missing limb. This was different. This was the quiet of a house where something had been settled. The investigation moved on its own timeline after that. I gave my testimony to the district attorney's office in late June. Frank handled the legal mechanics. Stephanie filed for separation in July. She moved into a rental apartment on the east side of Nashville and called me twice. The first time to apologize, the second time to ask if I could recommend a therapist for the kind of situation where you've been living next to a lie without fully recognizing it. I gave her a name. She thanked me. She didn't call again after that, and I didn't expect her to. Marcus hired 2 lawyers and spent August trying to negotiate. The DA declined to reduce the charges. Criminal fraud in the first degree for the insurance claim. Theft of property over $10,000 for the rental diversion. His business license was suspended pending the investigation. Gerald called me in September. He was helping Stephanie with her legal costs. He didn't mention Marcus. The Garrison Street sale closed on a Wednesday in October. I sat in Frank's office and signed the documents and watched a wire transfer confirmation load on his computer screen. After 35 years of teaching American history to teenagers in a building with a leaking roof and outdated textbooks, my wife's property, the duplex she'd bought as an investment property before I'd even thought about rental income, was worth $1.1 million. She'd been right, like she usually was. Sophie called me that evening. How are you feeling? Like I should have paid more attention a long time ago. Dad, you trusted your son. I know. That was the right instinct. He made the wrong choice with it. She was quiet for a moment. What are you going to do with the money? I thought about that. The house was paid off. My pension covered what I needed. Rachel, I stopped. Sophie's nursing school loans, $68,000 she'd been carrying since Vanderbilt. chipping away at them on a nurse's salary while working 12-hour shifts. "First," I said, "I'm paying off your loans." She was quiet for so long I checked whether the call had dropped. Then she said, "Dad," in a voice that sounded exactly like her mother. "Your mother would want that," I said. "I want that. I can't." "You can, because I'm your father, and this is what parents do when they can." She cried a little. I let her. Then she laughed, and that part sounded like her mother, too. I established a scholarship in Helen's name through Lincoln High School's foundation, the Helen Briggs Memorial Scholarship, for first-generation college students in Montgomery County. $25,000 annually, renewable. The first year's recipients were announced in November. I sat in the back of the Lincoln High auditorium for the ceremony and watched 3 teenagers stand up when their names were called and thought about Helen teaching 30 years of children to love books. The rest I put in savings and tried not to think about too much. I didn't need a boat. I didn't need a new house. I needed the things I already had. Marcus's case went to pre-trial in January. The federal charge on the insurance fraud carried the heavier exposure. His lawyer negotiated. The DA agreed to a plea that included full restitution, all rental proceeds, plus the life insurance funds paid to me within 18 months, a suspended sentence, 2 years of supervised probation, and a permanent bar from serving as a property manager or holding power of attorney in the state of Tennessee. Frank called me when the plea was finalized. He'll have a record. Not jail, but a record, and he'll have to rebuild from the ground up. Thank you, Frank. You did the hard part. I thought about that afterward. What the hard part was. Not the legal process, Frank did that. Not the confrontation I'd prepared for weeks. The hard part was the time between knowing and doing something about it. The mornings I sat with my coffee and thought about Marcus at 7 years old, and wondered whether knowing the truth made the father-son parts of my life easier or harder to carry. Harder, at first. Then, something else. Marcus called me on a Tuesday in February. I let it ring 3 times. Then I answered, "Dad." His voice was stripped down, none of the polish, none of the ease. "I know you don't have any reason to talk to me. I needed to hear your voice." I sat down in Helen's armchair. "I'm here. I've been trying to write you a letter for 2 months, he said. "I can't get past the first sentence." "What's the first sentence?" A long pause. "I'm sorry isn't enough, but it's the only place I know to start." "It's the right place," I said. "It's just not the finish line." He exhaled. Are you okay? Financially, I mean. I know the restitution is on a schedule." "Marcus," I said it gently, "I'm not asking you to fix me. I was never not okay. Your mother made sure of that. You just didn't know what you had because you were busy measuring it against Gerald Whitmore's bank account." He didn't say anything for a while. "I have a lot of work to do," he said finally. "Yes," I said. "You do. And I'm not going to tell you it will be fast, or easy, or that one phone call is the beginning of something being repaired between us. It isn't. Repair takes time, and it takes choices, every day, over a long period." I paused. "But I'm your father. That doesn't go away. So when you've done some of that work, you can call me again, and we'll see where we are." "Okay," he said quietly. "Okay," I said. I hung up and sat in the armchair for a long time. Sophie came over the following Sunday for dinner. She brought Jake, a cardiothoracic fellow she'd been seeing for a few months, a quiet man with a good laugh who helped clear the dishes without being asked. We ate on the back porch because April in Tennessee is the best month of the year and it seemed like a waste to be inside. Sophie planted new tomatoes in her mother's raised beds before dinner, kneeling in the dirt in her jeans, completely unbothered about getting her hands dirty. After dinner, while Jake did the dishes, Sophie and I sat on the porch steps in the early dark, watching the yard. "Are you happy?" she asked. I thought about that question. About Memorial Day and a $2 scratch-off. About Frank Patterson's office and the click of a wire transfer. About Helen's pot roast recipe and 35 years of trying to teach teenagers why the past matters. "Yeah," I said. "I am." She leaned her head on my shoulder. "Good." The oak in the backyard, the one Helen planted from a sapling in 1994, the year Sophie was born, had come into full spring leaf. The branches spread wide over the yard, over the raised beds, over the porch where Helen used to sit on Sunday evenings. It was tall enough now to shade the whole south side of the house in the summer. I thought about what Helen would say if she were here. She would probably say something practical. Check the gutters. The tomatoes need fertilizer. She was that kind of woman. Then she would sit down beside me and put her hand in mine and not say anything else for a long time, because she had also been that kind of woman. I thought about the $2 scratch-off sitting framed on my desk in the study. I'd had it framed after the lottery claim processed, still scratched, still slightly smudged. Sophie had asked why I kept it. It was a reminder. Not of luck. I didn't believe in luck the way people said it at cocktail parties. I believed in choices. The choice to stay quiet or to speak. The choice to mistake silence for safety. The choice to let the people you love believe they can take from you without consequence because you've confused keeping the peace with keeping yourself. Marcus gave me that ticket as a punchline. $2 against $20,000 in front of 30 people. And it turned out to be worth $85,000, which is ironic, but that wasn't the point. The point was that it started everything in motion. It was the moment I finally understood that my son did not see me. Not as a father, not as a person, not as someone who had spent 35 years shaping young minds and 27 years building a life with a woman he called his mother and 50 years trying to be decent in a world that rewards other things. He saw a retired teacher with a pension and a house and a mild manner that could be managed. He was wrong about the mild manner. If you're listening to this story, you might be wondering whether I regret it. Whether there was a way to handle it that didn't end with my son's business license revoked and his marriage over and his name on a court record. Here's what I know. Marcus made choices over a period of years, deliberately, methodically. He didn't make one mistake in a moment of crisis. He built a system. He used my grief, my trust, my love for his mother, and my tendency to believe the best of the people I raised. He looked at everything Helen and I built together, and he thought, how do I take that for myself? I didn't do that to him. He did that. The truth doesn't destroy families. Lies do. I also know this. I taught American history for 35 years. The thing that always struck me about the moments that mattered in history, the ones the textbooks got wrong by making them too inevitable, too neat, was that they were always made by ordinary people who decided, at some specific point, to stop accepting less than the truth. Not heroes. Not visionaries. Ordinary people who got tired. I got tired of being worth a $2 scratch-off. There are 5 things I want to say to anyone who's been sitting in that chair. The first is that your silence has a price. I stayed quiet for 2 years while my son collected money from my property and my marriage and my grief. Every time I didn't ask questions, I was telling him it was okay. It wasn't okay. Silence isn't neutral. It has a cost, and someone is always paying it. The second is that family is not a reason to accept less. I loved my son. I still love my son, in the complicated, durable way you love someone you raised. Someone who once cried on your couch because a football game didn't go the right way. That love is real. It is also not a reason to let someone use you. You can love someone and still require them to be accountable. Those two things are not opposites. The third is that worth is not comparative. My son held me up against Gerald Whitmore and found me less impressive. A fishing boat versus a scratch-off. A colonial in a good neighborhood versus a 3-bedroom on Maple Ridge Drive. What he didn't understand what men like Gerald Whitmore eventually do understand, because life has a way of teaching it, is that worth measured against someone else's money is not worth at all. It's just arithmetic. The fourth is that the truth is not revenge. I did not expose Marcus to humiliate him or to cause him pain. I did it because there were crimes being committed, because the people around him deserved to know who he actually was, and because my wife's life insurance policy was not his to take. The truth was not a weapon. It was a fact. Facts don't require malice. They just require courage. The fifth thing is the one Helen taught me without ever saying it directly. She taught it by planting tomatoes and reading to other people's children for 30 years and paying premiums on a life insurance policy for a future she hoped she'd have and feared she might not. She taught it by being consistently, stubbornly, undramatically present. The lesson was this: a life built on small, honest choices over a long period of time is worth more than a life built on clever ones. It doesn't photograph as well. It doesn't impress people at cookouts. But when everything else falls away, it's still standing. My house is still standing. Helen's tomatoes came up this spring better than any year I can remember. Sophie calls every Sunday morning. The oak tree in the backyard is 21 feet tall. I'm 63 years old, retired history teacher, father of two, lottery winner, widower. My son gave me a $2 scratch-off because he thought I wasn't paying attention. I was paying attention. I had been paying attention my whole life. And that, as it turns out, is worth more than he ever knew.